welcome. I'm Heather Arnold, local history librarian here at Casey Cardinia Libraries, and we're looking today at tracing your family history, beginner's family history. Family history. So family history, can I tell you from the start, as we've just been talking, is addictive and fun. I love family history. So this is my great grandmother and my great auntie and her daughter, my father's cousin. So 3 generations of the Weatherhead family. I love these family photos. And family history is all about hatches, that's my husband, matches, his parents' wedding, and dispatches, of course, deaths. So births, marriages, and deaths. That's all family history, and it all starts with you. So if I have to give you some advice, is start with you. You cannot start with William the Conqueror and work back. You need to start with you. This is a lovely 4-generation photo of my husband's side. So it's just lovely. So we'll start with how you record the information. So what you need to start by saying what you know, and then you have to record that somewhere. So you can either decide to record on paper or to use a family history program. So these are some suggestions of family history programs. So Legacy is a free program which is recommended by Lynn Bradley, who was the past president of the Narrabri District Family History Group. You can download a free program, and then if you want to, you can upgrade to a paid program, but she says the free program is perfectly adequate. Or you can use Family Tree Maker, Family Historian, and of course, Ancestry Family History Database and Find My Past Family History Database also allow you to put your own family tree up. But of course, the issue with those two is that if you stop subscribing to Ancestry, then you find that you don't have access to your family tree. Whereas like Legacy and those ones are a one-off program that you buy that just sits on your computer. Ancestry, of course, the benefit of Ancestry and Find My Past is that because you're on the internet, you can sometimes network with other people, but that can also, of course, be the disadvantage. And Family Search, which is the Latter-day Saints family history website, they also allow you to put your family tree up on their website. And that's free. So Family Search is free. So as long as you just keep being a member or having a membership, which is free, of that, you can have your family tree up there forever. And the benefit, of course, the other benefit of Ancestry and Find My Past and Family Search is that they, because they're online, they give you hints all the time. So they sort of, there's advantages of that. There's advantages in having just like a legacy program, which is a standalone program. So you just really have to look at those options and make a decision. Or you may decide to go the old-fashioned way and just use bits of paper. And of course, you can write it all down in a notebook, but you can use an ancestral chart, which you can get from you download this from Ancestry. And Ancestry and Find My Past, I forgot to say, you can use free through the library at the moment. So usually they provide access through the library, only in the library, but due to lockdown, they're still providing access. So you can log on through our website from your home to Ancestry and to Find My Past. So the ancestral chart is just where you start. So you'd put in on the left-hand side here, like your name, and then at the top, your father, then your mother, then your grandpa, then your grandma, then of course your other grandma, other grandpa, and then continue on. So, my advice would be if you're just starting off, just get a chart like this and just add in everything that you know, like who you are, where you were born, then your parents, if you know where they were married, and then if your grandparents, if you know where they were married, all those sorts of details. And once you know what you know, then you know what you don't know. So you can use this ancestral chart, and you can also use what they call a family group record. And this is where you'd put, so the ancestral chart is for you and your direct ancestors. A family group record includes sort of peripheral relatives. So in this case here, your husband, the wife might be your grandma and your grandpa, and then the children listed would be, of course, your dad and his brothers and sisters, or your aunties and uncles. So this is where you keep sort of groups together like that. So that's always a good way to start, just as I said, just to get the information down and to sort of keep it into some sort of coherent order. as opposed to, as I said, an exercise book or the back of an envelope, or you know, if you start off family history and you're a bit random like me, you'll have lots of bits of paper everywhere, and nothing wrong with that either. But sometimes it's good to be really organised. So just a few hints. All women are listed in there with their maiden or their birth names. So when we go back to this one here, you'd put your name with your maiden name, your birth. I know it's a bit of a quaint term these days, maiden name, but you know, your birth name, and then your father. Normally they put the father on top. You put your father here, and then your mother with her birth name, and then your grandma with her birth name. Oops, the daisy. Where am I going? Oh, backwards. Gosh. Right. And then use full name. So if your grandfather's called Joe, but he's really Joseph, use Joseph. It's better in the long run. If you know the middle name, put a middle name in, because sometimes between generations you get a bit confused whether, you know, Joe is really Joseph and whether it's Joseph Albert or Joseph Francis, you know. So it's always good to put the middle names if you know them, and be consistent with birth dates, marriage dates, death dates. So write 4th of May 1976, not 4/5/76, which of course could be April the 5th, or if you're an American, or April the 5th if you're an American, or 4th of May if you're English. And then also, once you get back to generations, you sometimes get confused whether 76 is actually 1876 or 1976. So just sort of be consistent from the start. And whether you write April the 5th, 1976 or 5 April 1976, it doesn't really matter. Just be consistent with how you put names and how you put dates. Now, so where do I get this information? So my advice first is to write down everything you know, everything that you can remember about your family, because you might remember things like, you know, your parents are married at Bendigo, and you know your grandma was born at Euroa. You might sort of remember all these sorts of things. So write them down. And then other places you can go to is looking at old photographs. The family Bible. People talk about a family Bible. I don't know any families actually got a family Bible. Apparently there were some in the olden days, family Bibles. So you know, so if you happen to have a family Bible, people often recorded the birth dates of people. I've actually got a diary that was grandma's birthday book. Well, mum's got it actually, and she just always wrote down, you know, any of her cousins and their birthdays. So you might even find you have old papers like that. So we'll just go to here. So this is like photographs I was talking about. This little postcard that's in grandma's collection, and that was sent to from Mrs. Sheldon from her brother, and they're photographs of his children. So what it tells you is that, you know, at the time they were at Tynong, and this is KS Weatherhead, how old he is. I like that they don't put their first names, of course, and that's Winnie Weatherhead. And it was, you know, so but they give you clues, things like that as to family members and where they were at the time. And in this case here, this is my great-grandparents, and we know this photograph was taken in Sale. So, and I know they lived in Sale. So sometimes you find that the photographs, if they have a photographer's information on, that gives you an idea of where people were living at the time. And it doesn't give you birth dates, it doesn't give you death dates, but what it does, all this information, is build up a picture of your family and where they were living at the time, perhaps what they were doing. And that's the sort of thing that you want to complete a whole family history. So this is my great auntie, and she was presented with this booklet from the Avon Shire Council, because I lived up near Clydebank. She lived near Sale. And that's just nice to say. So we know that, for instance, that Lucy was in that area at Stratford there in 1902. And that's just another hint as to where your family were at a certain moment in time. So you may not have any of these papers at home, but you never know what you might have at home. You might have employment papers. My husband was in the Merchant Navy, and he's got all his papers. He's in the Merchant Navy, and he's got all his papers that tell you what ships he was on and when he got to the ship and when he was discharged from the ship. Or you might find that people kept their pay slips, or people kept a diary. You don't know. There's all these sort of, hopefully your family may have some of these sort of books or family papers that, as I say, give you clues as to occupations or locations of the family. Now, family members. Talk to the family. So we're just talking about this before, that some family people have, like I talked to my sister about my childhood and she says, blah, 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 don't you remember this? I think, no, so even though you have the same childhood, sometimes your siblings or your cousins remember things differently. So it's always worth talking to family members to find out what they know and what they remember and what their family stories were, because of course, my family memories of grandma and my cousin's family memories of my grandma, for instance, may be totally different, or they may be the same thing. You don't sort of know. So it's worth talking to your family members, and not so much these days, but in the olden days, in the 70s even, that people didn't always tell the truth because they may want to cover up a scandal. So it may have been the birth of an illegitimate child, or it may have been the fact that the mother was, the woman was 7 months pregnant when she was married, and all those sorts of things, which were considered a scandal in those days. But nowadays, no one thinks twice. Very few people think twice about it. But so what I'm saying is that some family members don't always tell you the truth because they don't want to present the family in a bad light. But, you still get their memories down because they may give you clues that may be useful in the future. And also, not so much these days, but, when I was a girl, we always called my parents' friends auntie and uncle because for some reason you couldn't call them by their first name. So that may be confusing because you may actually think they're your auntie and uncle, but in fact they were family friends. So, that's something to be aware of. And the other thing is, talk to your, so I wrote this in my notes, talk to your relatives before it's too late. But the point is that, we don't all live forever. And, and I wish now, and we all wish now, that we talked to grandma more than what we did, that we had an interesting family history when we were young, and they were still had good memories, but you can't go back in time. But if you can still talk to your aunties or if you're still lucky and got grandparents or your parent or your mother or your father, start talking to them about what they remember about their family. One of the modern things that have come into family history recently is DNA tests. So I've done my, Ruth was talking about this before, I've done my Ancestry DNA, and me, my brother, my sister and my mother, and I found out that, she's indeed my mother, and that my brother and my sister are indeed my siblings. And then we've found, and then if you're in Ancestry, for instance, it's the same with all of these. If other members of your family have done their DNA through Ancestry, well, then you get links to them as well. So I found links from both sides of my family, from mum's side and dad's side, so that I know that my parents are my real parents. But of course, what happens with DNA is that sometimes you find a surprise. So as I said, for around $100, you could receive results that surprise or distress you, because you may find that your father wasn't your father, or that your brother is only your half brother, not your full brother, because your mother had an affair, or some people have also found that they've found a new cousin or a new half brother that they didn't know. So sometimes you find that you find information that they can be exciting, because you find you have a whole new family out there. If, for instance, your father or your grandfather, I'm not suggesting they did, had an affair with some woman that had children with other people, with other people, you may find a whole new family out there, which could be exciting. And then the other good thing about DNA tests, or bad things about DNA tests, it's a bit of a double-edged sword, that if you're adopted or a donor conceived and you weren't told, you may actually find your biological parents. But of course, that's a whole Pandora's box if you're opening up those sorts of things. So DNA, I actually think DNA tests are sort of fun if the results work your way. And I did find out that, you can find out, I don't know how true this is, but I found out that I'm 11% Norwegian. So I like to think of myself as a Viking, but, I don't think that's the case. But anyway, so you do find out some fun things, and it's whether you want to spend $100 of your money on a DNA test is up to you, but you can find out some fun things. Apparently there's a group on Facebook, secret Facebook group called DNA NPE. NPE stands for Not Parent Expected, which is You didn't expect to find, you found out unexpected things about who your parents were. So, and that can just be devastating, especially just if you found out that, your father isn't, the man who raised you isn't really your biological father. I mean, it can be absolutely devastating to the family and to your siblings. So, as I said, it's a Pandora's box and you have to decide whether you want to open it or not. So other sources of information apart from the paperwork we talked about before, family photos and that are symmetries. So Jane talked about symmetries this morning. We had to talk about that. And symmetries are a wealth of information about finding information about your ancestors. So this is my great-grandparents' grave at at Bunyip. And there's three sites which are listed in the handout. AustralianCemeteries.com, which is a really, really good site, which lists Australian cemeteries. There's Big Graves and Find a Grave, which are sort of more international things. So the things you can find in cemeteries are, well, there's two things about that. So on Australian cemeteries, some cemeteries have records that came from the headstones. So only people who have a headstone are actually listed on the site. And some cemeteries have information that comes from the registers. So that means it's a broader group of names. But either way, if you know that your family came from, well, in this case, they were Bunyip, came from around that area, it's always worth looking at the cemetery to see what you can find. And in this case here, we've got Horatio's death date, Horatio and Eleanor's death date. So, and their age when they died. Some headstones have more information. They often include the woman's maiden name. They include children that were already born or buried in the same grave. So there are lots of things that you can find out in the cemetery. And if you're really lucky, sometimes you even find a photograph of the cemetery on the website. So the Australian Cemeteries website has the Bunyip Cemetery, and that does include photographs. So it may well be that, you don't have to travel all that way to find a headstone. So never just if you feel like going for a drive, once we're allowed, going for a drive, go to a cemetery and have a look and see what you can find of your ancestors. And there's big, like Springvale Cemetery, Springvale Botanical Cemetery, the old necropolis, have all their records online. The ones at Fawkner have all their records online. Melbourne General Cemetery do not have their records online because apparently in the 70s, I think it was, there's a bit of a scandal where some graves were resold. And so technically the owner of the grave is the first person that was in it. Because they were resold, there's all these legal issues. So that's why apparently the Melbourne General Cemetery don't have their records online yet. But there's lots of cemeteries that do. And Springvale, because it was a crematorium, the earliest crematorium in Victoria, you'd often find that people if you can't find them at their headstone, you find that they were cremated, and they have lists of everyone who was actually cremated, even though they're not actually still either interred at Springvale. So never overlook cemeteries as a source of great information for family history. Old newspapers. So historical societies have old newspapers. The State Library of Victoria have all the newspapers published in Victoria, and there's Trove, of course. So Trove is the National Library of Australia's program where they've digitised Australian newspapers from 1803. If you've never seen Trove before, it's worth looking up. It's the most amazing resource. So, do you want to say something, Robin?
No.
Oh, sorry, no. So that's right. Yeah. So anyway, yeah. So feel free to interrupt, is what I should have said. Sorry. Yeah. So Trove. So you'd find birth notices, death notices, obituaries, engagement notices, family notices. It's just the most amazing resource for family history if you have people who've been in Australia all that time, and you just can't. I just find so much in there. You often find, or sometimes you find accounts, especially in country newspapers, accounts of marriages, and it lists, the bride, the bridesmaid, the groomsman, the best man, all the presents that were given, the guests who attended. There's just so much information on Trove. If you haven't looked at it, it's well worth looking at as a source for family history. And the other thing they often have, the newspapers at the time had a lot more family information and information about the country what you get these days in the Melbourne Dailies, like the Herald Sun and the Age. And so you'd often find a report about the the Coralline Young Farmers Club or something like that, which lists members who were there, or you get reports about the local show, and you might find that your grandfather or your grandmother had some entry in the local show and won a prize. So you also find not only birth, death, and marriage information, but information about your family that helps complete the picture of your family. Or you might find that they were counsellors, or that they were on the local council, and they were trustees of the cemetery, or elders of the church. All those sorts of information you can sometimes, not always, find through Trove. And Trove is getting more and more content all the time. Of course, it costs money and time to put newspapers up on Trove, because but it's really worth looking at the old newspapers. Not every newspaper is digitised, and that's where the State Library of Victoria and other state libraries in other states have lots of newspapers that aren't digitised. And Historical Societies also hold newspapers. So I'm president of the Koorup Swamp Historical Society, and we have a full run of the Koorup Sun, of which only which we've digitised up to 1980, but only 4 years, which is the war years, the First World War years, are actually on Trove. So you never know, historical societies might have some information as well. Online databases. So we spoke about Ancestry and I've mentioned Ancestry and Find My Past. So Ancestry and Find My Past and databases of databases. So essentially on Ancestry, you can find, they bring all the databases together into one huge database with millions and millions and millions of resources. Family history ones, military ones, everything. I just can't even begin to talk about Ancestry. I mean, I love Ancestry, and I use Ancestry all the time, and I have family trees up on Ancestry. I also have them up on Find My Past. I have to say, I love Ancestry more than Find My Past, but that's just me personally. And as I said before, they're both normally you have to subscribe to them, but they are free to use at the moment through the library. So Family Search is a bit different. Sorry. Yeah. Family Search is a bit different because Family Search is the database of the Mormons, the Latter-day Saints, Jesus Christ, what's it called? The Church of the Latter-day Saints. And they have, what they've been doing over the years is they've been going for the last 40 years or more. They go to all these little parish churches everywhere throughout the world, and they digitise, they microfilm the records, and then they've digitised them all and they index them. So they're all actually, we're getting a lot of feedback here. Yeah. So they're all, can you hear me? Any feedback? No, okay. So they're all actually available now for you to search on Family Search. And it's a remarkably generous thing that the Latter-day Saints have done to allow us access to all their material for free. Like, it doesn't cost you anything to look. You just have to join up. It doesn't cost you anything to join, but you need to be a member, which is free, to actually search. But it is just the most wonderful resource that they've made free to everyone. So it's worth looking at Family Search for anything. The other thing about the Family Search as well is it has lots of records from what I call non-Anglo countries. It's easy to find information from England and Canada and Australia and New Zealand, America, like those sort of Anglo countries, but it's a lot harder to find information from the rest of Europe or Africa or South America. So Family Search would be my first suggestion to go to if you're looking for information from, places other than the Western countries. So, or Western countries with Anglo countries. So that would be where I'd go to. So online database is always worth looking at. And as I said, you can put your family trees up on these ones, but if you stop subscribing to Ancestry, well, then you lose access to your family tree. And Ancestry is not cheap. I mean, it's about, for the full subscription, it's about it's a couple of $100 a year. So, it's a lot of money. Right. So then there's all this, we'll go back actually. So the other thing about Ancestry is that, and Find My Past, is that you can put your family tree up in there, your cousin can put your family tree up on there, and of course you obviously have some people in common, but you know your family tree may be completely accurate, and you might think, oh, my cousin's family tree is a load of rubbish, you know, because some people they don't do very good research. So the thing about it is that sometimes you find information on Ancestry or Find My Past of family trees that people have put up, which isn't always correct. So just keep that in mind. Right. So there's official information, and official information is what we get from births, deaths and marriages. So government issued birth, deaths and marriage certificates. So in Australia, the civil registration started virtually as soon as the Europeans, the English landed in whatever, when we know not from Captain Cook, but you know, started in the 1830s, because civil registration began in England in 1837. Previous to that, information was recorded at a parish level, like through the churches. So of course, because Australia was essentially settled basically, or especially Victoria, around the same time that civil registration came in England, civil registration also came to Australia at the same time. So so government issued birth certificates are the official source of information, but not always correct. And there's various indexes. So you'll find that in the handout. I've given you all the websites of the various birth, deaths and marriage centres around Australia. And then you can look up through the index, and then you can buy the certificate. And these are the various internet addresses. So, and often a certificate, so why would you purchase a certificate? Currently in Victoria, it's $20 to purchase a non-certified certificate, which is what you just need for family history. And it would tell you, this is a sort of information that it tells you: place of birth of the baby, parents' names, occupation, age, birthplace, date and place of marriage, and older siblings. So in reality, usually the birthplace is right, the parents' names are right, occupation. Age is not always correct, because people lie about their age frequently because they want to look younger, want to look older, whatever the reason is. They can't remember when they were born. Parents' date and place of marriage. Well, often you find that sometimes you find they perhaps lied about that because, you know, their marriage took place 2 weeks before the baby was born, and they say it took place 2 years before the baby was born. So most of the information you can take for granted, but some of the information you can't. Older siblings are usually correct, but you may not always get half brothers and sisters. A marriage certificate contains the information you see on the screen. And once again, you usually find that's correct, but it's often the age of the bride and groom. Not often, sometimes the age of the bride and groom is incorrect, as I said, especially if they want to pretend they're younger or they're older. Parents' names, you often get good information from that, including and so you also get the mother's maiden name. And the death certificate and the marriage certificate, because the people who are marrying, the husband, the contracting parties, as I like to call it, because they're the ones that provide the information, that's usually correct. A death certificate, you often find information is either missing or incorrect, because so if someone dies and the informant, because they're the ones who give the information for the death certificate, if they were like a neighbour, they may not know, for instance, the person's mother's maiden name. They may not know all the children. They may only know half the children. There's some bits of that which is they may not really know when the person was born. You don't really know, but these are the official sources of information. But just bear in mind that they're not always the 100% correct. But the benefit is sometimes if it's worth buying a certificate if you've got a bit of a brick wall, because what you might find, and of course you can't look at these certificates before you buy them, so you've got to decide to invest your $20 beforehand. So, but we'll go actually, yeah. So what you might find is that you spend your $20 thinking, oh, I should be able to get my grandmother's maiden name from this, but then you find out that it's missing for some reason. So you don't always get what you want. So the certificates in or the indexes to these certificates in Queensland, for instance, they have more information because they actually have the exact date of death. And whereas in Victoria, you just get 1876. In Queensland, that actually tell you it's the 1st of January, 1876, or the birth date, you get the actual birth date. So states, it varies between states. In Tasmania, through their archives, Tasmanian archives, which is incredibly good, they actually list, they actually have lots of certificates online. So I was just looking for a marriage certificate in Tasmania just before from 1890. You can get it online, free in Tasmania. In Victoria, you pay $20. So it just varies between states. Now, why can't I find what I want? So there's a whole raft of reasons why you're looking through the indexes, you're trying to find the marriage of someone, and then you have to work out why. So first of all, the index is taken from, so what happens is, we'll go back a step, the baby's born, eventually the baby gets registered. So in the olden days, of course, in some outback towns, the registrar didn't come around, it came around like 3 times a year or something like that. So if you weren't in town the day the registrar came, the baby may not have even been registered. Or else then you get to registrar and he's old Mr. Phillips, who's 95 years old. You tell him the name of the child, he writes it down incorrectly, he writes down the birth date incorrectly, he writes the parents' names down incorrectly, but you don't always know because you don't see that, you see. So it's baby's registered, then it goes back to the birth, deaths and marriages registrar in Melbourne, and that's sort of transcribed again. So that's another reason why something may be transcribed incorrectly. And then, of course, recently, all these written indexes have then been put onto the computer. Once again, another transcription, which may be another reason why there's a mistake. So you often find, so this is Thulis is my mother's maiden name, but I've seen it spelled phonetically Thulis because that's how it's spelled. So I mean, so if a surname is spelled incorrectly, think of the phonetic way you might spell it and look at the spelling of that. Maybe, as I said, the event wasn't registered. You find in some families that like 3 children were registered and 2 aren't. As I said, it may have been that the registrar just hadn't bothered coming around at the time. Indexes, as I said before, are transcribed manually. So they may mistake a T for an F or something like that. You may be looking for the birth of the baby after the marriage, when indeed it took place before the marriage. So I always find that if you can't find the birth of a child, have a look under the husband's name. Just have a look for the baby under the wife's maiden name, especially a first child, and you may find that she had the baby before she was married. But often you find that, so the baby was born before she was married, it's registered in her name because she can't register it in her husband's, in the father, this is the olden days, she can't register in her father's name because they weren't married. That was the rule at the time. But then you find that the child then takes on the father's name. So you may find that they were married under using the father's name, like the husband, the wife's husband's name, but they were actually registered under the wife's name, if you get what I mean. So you do really need to start looking at all variations of the mother's name and the father's name if you can't find a birth. People lie about their age and they lie about their previous marital status. And they use other names, not their registered names. So, of course, we all know some families love nicknames. So you've got a whole lot of families who, Chris and Michael, they're called Bob, and they're Chris and Robert, and they're called Alan. There's some families that use a lot of nicknames. So you may think your father's called Terry, but in actual fact, he was registered as, Joseph or something, and they never liked it. So, you just have to remember that you can't always find the names that you want. And of course, the event may have taken place interstate or overseas, and that's why you can't find it. So there, and sometimes you are never going to find it. It's just not registered for some reason. So the other thing is to look at is the they used to have all the Digger CD-ROMs. They're called Digger. They were the people who produced them, and they were the CD-ROMs, and they had, there used to be a microfilm in the olden days, and then but if you can get access to them, you can get access to them to the family history group. That sometimes you find they're on the old indexes, but they weren't transferred across to the current indexes on the computer through the Victorian birth deaths and marriages. And so you sometimes find, if you can, as I said, that if you can go back to the one step back to another source, that you might actually find the name there. Or sometimes, as I said, you'll never find the name. We're just talking before about, if you can't find a death, like you may know, for instance, that your great uncle came to Australia, and then you can't find his death record anywhere. But if you look through the old newspapers, you see report after report of body found in the bush, and they're buried unnamed, and they don't know who they are, because these are people who either changed their name when they got to Australia or wanted to run away and hide from their past. And there was another case, I did a talk last year, and they their great-grandfather came out as from Sweden, had a Swedish name, but when he got to Australia, called himself Smith. So of course, they're looking for must have been a great uncle. They're looking for the Swedish name, and it wasn't until they did their DNA test that they actually found relatives in another state who knew this person, and then had and they could tell the whole story. So that's the reason why sometimes DNA is useful, and secondly, why it's good to talk to your cousins and your other relatives, because you may be able to find out information that their side of the family knows that your side of the family doesn't know. So search strategies. Think outside the square. So this is what I'm saying. So if you can't find the birth under the father's name, look under the mother's maiden name. Sometimes you can use, we'll go to here, use phonetic spelling, as I said. So Rouse is my my name, my maiden name, but sometimes it's often spelled with a W, not a U. Eleanor, Helen, Alan, and Nell are all the same name, or not all the same name, but often used interchangeably. Gardener, garden, all those sorts of variations, gardener, garden, gardener. This is where you might use a truncation key. So you can, truncation symbol. So you can use that on Ancestry, and you can use it on the Victorian indexes to birth, deaths, and marriages. So you might replace, with gardener, you might replace the I with the truncation symbol, the little asterisk, and then it would search for the 3 variations of the names. So always try different variations of the surname, different spellings, how you might think it is said phonetically, and then also know that, as I said, some like an Alan or a Nell, they might be registered as Alan, but they might be registered when they're born, but their marriage certificate might be under Nell, or their death certificate might be under Nell. So you just don't know. You just have to try variations, use a truncation. Put in less information. So what sometimes happens is that I see people, they fill out on forms everything they know. So of course, if you're trying to find Nell Miller, and then you put what you think is her mother's maiden name down, you fill that box out, and the father's name down, and fill out the birthday, what you think you know. And then because you're filling in all the boxes on the search screen, that's what the computer looks for. And sometimes you get a match, but sometimes, of course, if any of this information is wrong, you don't get a hit at all. So it's always worth, I feel, putting less information and then whittling down your search results, rather than putting lots of information, because you don't always get what you want. And so you assume that, that Nell's mother was called Gertrude, but in actual fact, she may not have been called Gertrude, and it was registered as something else. So always just try various combinations of first name. So do search and try one combination. So you might put in a surname and then fill in the box that has the mother's maiden name and the father's first name. Can't find the result, just try other searches. So just keep trying different search combinations of names and places and dates, and sometimes you get what you want in the end. Sometimes you never do. But if you don't succeed at first, just keep trying, because sometimes you find what you want. Or if you do, you can sometimes find what you want on Ancestry, and you can't find it in the Victorian indexes of birth, deaths, and marriages, because Ancestry have taken their information from the old CD-ROMs plus other sources. And sometimes you find that you can find it on Find My Past, but not Ancestry. So it just depends. If you can't find it in one database, look in another database and just try a different search. So this is a very quick introduction. So where do you go to next? So it's worth joining the family history group. So on the, I've given you a list of genealogical sites on the internet, and that's got a list of the local family history groups, which include the Narre District Family History Group, who are based at Cranbourne Library. Depending on where you are, I've got the address for the West Gippsland group and the address for the Frankston group. There's also the address of the AIGS, or it's now called Family History Connections, and they're at Blackburn. And there's a Genealogical Society of Victoria, who are based in Queen Street or Burke Street in Melbourne. So it's worth joining a family history group because they have lots of advice. They often have lots of talks. They have lots and lots of records. And I'd, of course, recommend Narre District Family History Group right here at Cranbourne Library, or where I usually work, because they have not just Narre, they're called Narre because they started off in Narre, but they have information about, especially Casey Cardinia, but also Victoria and Australia and interstate and overseas. Like, they have so much information, more information than what you can get online, and they have databases that they have to pay for, and they have, they've been collecting information for so many years. So it's really worth, I feel, joining the family history group if you can. Here's my list here. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, they did have family history centres. There was one at Narre North, but I think most of their records are now online through Family Search. So it's worth looking at their database, which, as I said, is free. Internet. So there's a list that, in the chat that I've given you of 5 pages of various family history internet sites, which are mainly free. So there's lots of, you may not find what you want, but they're all free. You can look at them from home. You don't need to look at them through the library, and you might find what you want through some of them. I can't always guarantee the whether the information is correct, but you never know what you might find. Public libraries, we have lots of, we've of course subscribed to Ancestry and Find My Past. We have books and Tracing Your Family Tree and magazines, etc. And historical societies. So if you know that your family came from Warrnambool or wherever, it's worth contacting the local historical society, because they have lots of information that isn't online. Not everything is online. That's the thing. Actually, I should have told you that from the start. Not everything is online. And but so family histories, they have history societies have, maybe files of family information. They may have old maps. They have old newspapers. They have collections of photographs. They have, if they have a museum, they might have information or things related to your family. So you never know. Your family may have donated a potato harvester or something to the museum. You might find something like that. So you never know what they've got. So if you go to the Royal Historical Society of Victoria, on their website under affiliated societies, just click the search box. You'll get a full list of historical societies. Of course, many of them are closed at the moment due to COVID, but once they reopen, they'll be happy to see you. So as Jane said in the talk this morning, or as I'll say now, before you visit a cemetery, before you visit a historical society, it's worth contacting them before you go to see what they've got, to find out whether they're open. They're all run by volunteers, and so we all do our best, but sometimes you find that they may not be open every day. They say if they know that you come in, then they may know that someone in their group knows information about your family, and they may be on duty or something like that. So it's always worth looking at historical societies. I have to say that some historical societies do charge for you to use their resources, do charge for doing research for you. Others don't. So, just contact them and find out. Finally, civil registration. We talked about that before. So that's when government registration of birth system started. It's highly unlikely you can trace your ancestry back to William the Conqueror, and if you can get back to 1800 with accurate sources, you're doing well. You see some family trees on everywhere, whatever, and then they've gone right back to 1066, but then there's no sources. There's a gap of 200 years here, 200 years there. you really need to, and it's important to write down your sources so you can actually prove your information. And do not assume anything. So don't assume that people in England never moved from one place to another. Don't assume there's only one person with your ancestor's name in the village. It's not uncommon to find that cousins had the same names, that, you know, generations had the same names, and a William Smith had a William Smith had a William Smith. And I was like, just because you find a person with that name in the village where you think your family came from, it may not be your ancestor at all. So don't assume, and also don't assume that family stories are correct. Sometimes they are. Sometimes they have an element of truth, but sometimes, you know, they're all a bit made up. But, you know, it doesn't matter because family history is addictive and fun. So just remember that, like, you're doing this because it's fun. And that's one of the best things about family history. It's so exciting if you're looking on Trove or you're looking in Ancestry or you're looking in a database and you find the record of someone, one of your ancestors. It's just the most, I just think it's the most wonderful thing. So, and while I'm talking about family history, is that some people, they do family history because they want to get back 15 generations and they're only interested in that. And there's nothing wrong with that either. But some people, they want to look at their family. They do family history because they want the whole picture of their family. So they want to go back. They might only go back to when the family arrived in Australia. But what they're looking for is, where did grandma go to school? And what did they do? And what did grandma do for a job? And all those sorts of things. And were they involved in other community groups? Some people want to have the whole picture of their family life and all their activities and all their social clubs and everything. And some people just want to have names and dates. And as I said, either way, it's okay. You do what you want because it's your family. Oh, and one more thing. I did this talk once and some woman said to me, do I have to put my ex-husband's children on my family tree? And the thing is, you don't. It's your family tree. If you want to put your stepchildren because they're really like your own children, well, you can do that. If you don't want to put anyone like that, you don't put them on. Like, it's your tree. Like, you don't have to worry about, you're doing it for yourself. So if you don't want to put your stepchildren or the ex-husband on it, well, don't put them on. Just put whoever you like on. That's my view, because it's your tree and you want it to be fun. Okay, that's it. Thank you for listening.